Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel, and it is time for top 10 skill champions in MCOC June of 2021. Now, before we get to nitty bitty, I must remind you guys that this list is not a bible and is not intended to use as such. I have always been an advocate of ranking up goal orientated champions, as in rank up whoever is going to help you get where you want to go, rather than whoever somebody else says has higher arbitrary number or anything like that. On top of that, these lists are a mixture of my own personal opinion, evaluation of game, and a reflection of the current metagame. Now, typically I do try my best to sort these champions based on how relevant and how huge of an impact they have in game. Occasionally I do step in and I slide them up and down somewhat slightly based on my own thoughts about what is more and less effective. That being said, also, not that it really applies for skill class, but champions that are not available as 6 stars are automatically disqualified from being on these lists, because those are the rules that we have agreed that this will be the first time, because it is significantly affecting champions usage. Now, there are a handful of champions obviously who can still overcome it, but at large the game is moving towards the 6-star rank 3s. However, keep in mind that 5 stars currently still are able of doing pretty much every single piece of content, and they only are 6-star rank 3 champions are mainly like a luxury product. They're not a necessity outside of prestige. That being said, skill class has completely drastically changed its shape, outlook, relevance, and everything about it since December of 2020. Since that point, I believe we have had about 6-7 rank up buffs from Kabam. We have had a couple of new champions released, and most of them have hugely changed how we look at skill class in general. And if 6 months ago I was fairly confident, and without putting it too much thought in that, was ranking skill class as the weakest class in the game, now they are definitely in top 3 classes. Currently I'm ranking them as second, but I do think that it is a fairly close competition in between science, skill, and mutant classes. That being said, let's go over some champions that didn't make it in top 10, and it was very hard because skill class had about 8-9 champions competing for the last couple of spots in the top 10 list, and just because I didn't include them does not mean that I don't value those champions. It's just that I chose to go with other options. Good example would be Black Widow Deadly Origins. I love playing her. She's very fun champion. I do think she has her uses, but I do think that skill class has overall more useful champions. Night Rusher has been long-time favorite of mine, but I cannot deny the fact that he is taking a bit of a step back. He has never been really the fan favorite, but I had always been using him plenty. Now I haven't been using him all that much recently, for example. Then we also have probably the most scandalous exclusion of the top 10, which is Elsa Bloodstone. And I know how many people love Elsa Bloodstone. I'm fully well aware of it, and I myself like Elsa Bloodstone. I just think that we need to be able to separate our love for the character and character's flat out outright optimal value. When it comes to the top tiers of the game, Elsa Bloodstone has never had a meaningful, significant impact. Yes, there are always occasional straggling videos of her taking a tricky fight here and there, but in general, she has never been a Meta Alliance war attacker. She has never been a Meta Alliance quest champion, and she's used for questing for people that like using her for questing, just like Black Widow Deadly Origins is. But when push comes to shove, you must admit that Elsa Bloodstone never really makes at the top of the recommended champions lists. Now, I like her. I do think she's a great champion. If you like her, definitely rank her, use her, all that stuff. I'm not trying to, once again, insult your family's honor or love for Elsa. I like her myself, but just the point of these lists is not to entirely base it on my own feelings or attachments on the champions. Or Elsa or Night Rusher would have definitely made it in the top 10 list, just like, for instance, Taskmaster. I'm trying to reflect the current metagame much more than I'm trying to please as many people as I can. And then there are obviously some other champions, like for instance Ronin, who is some people's favorite, and he's quite a decent champion as well. Then we have, I don't know, Daredevil Hell's Kitchen. He won't make the top 10, but some people do like him. Then we have OG Black Panther. After his rework, he has solid kit of abilities. I just don't think he's quite good enough. I accept that there are a lot of people who enjoy using him right now, but he just does not quite cut it. On top of that, Body Panther is not really up there as well. I just don't see viable enough scenario for her to break into top tiers of the game. And yeah, Blade's not available. 6-star Massacre is another champion that I personally value highly. I love her, but I look at Massacre as the other side of the coin that is Black Widow Deadly Origins. He had a value update that made him a better version of himself. He's one of my favorite questing champions. Unfortunately, he does not make the top 10. So let's start with the actual top 10. 6 minutes in the video, better late than never. But spot number 10 is occupied by Killmonger. Now, Killmonger has always had some sort of presence in the game, if not in attacking capacity mainly, then definitely he has always been one of the standard defenders. That being said, he still maintains to find relevant uses in the game, be that in skill cap quest, where he can provide wades with his true strikes to accuracy. He has had some neat help via synergies, but I think ultimately the biggest downfall of Killmonger is his subpar damage output compared to some of the harder hitting skill champions. Killmonger never has had like a really dominant spot in the game. However, we can all agree that he is, for instance, one of the best options for MODOK bosses in Alliance Wars, regardless of the global nodes. And then the thing that kind of elevated him above Massacre, the thing that kind of elevated him above Black Widow Deadly Origins or OG Black Panther, is definitely the fact that he's sturdy. He has several cheese uses as well, whether that would be with Void Synergy on some Icarus lanes, or whether that would be with Heimdall Synergy for Aggression Fury. He can replace Electro if he's awakened, thanks to his reverberation mechanic. And on top of that, obviously, sustainable, accessible True Strike is extremely valuable. And I think the final kind of like candle in the birthday cake that is spot number 10 for Killmonger, we have to add those 3 indestructible charges that let him tank level 3s. And that is one of the things that skill class is kind of like the worst about in general. There's one thing that it is absolutely absent of skill class, that is ability to control power. But if Killmonger can't control opponent's power, then at the very least he has the second best thing, which is ability to tank level 3s like there is no tomorrow. All those things considered, I have rank 2 Killmonger. I'm not going to say that he is the most frequently used champion, but I do enjoy him. I do think he is a relatively good investment, and he might not necessarily be the king of any game mode in particular, but anybody who does like this champion can definitely get your catalyst worth back from him, whether that would be partially relying on his defensive capabilities, on his sturdiness, tankiness. He has crit resistance, which is also quite handy, and he can perform assisted intercepts, which is additional bonus as well by dropping his level 1s, which can be super helpful. Especially recently we see more and more of those nodes that require you to intercept on demand, and Killmonger does that. Killmonger does that very well, and that's why I gave him spot number 10. Spot number 9 is a champion that personally I have never been a huge fan of, and champion that definitely upon its release was overhyped through the moon, touted as love child of Nick Fury and Corvus Glaive, and that is Hitmonkey. Now, Hitmonkey has a very, very obvious Achilles heel, which is he's squishy as poop, as a wet, soft poop that would come out if you have some sort of stomach bag. That's just the problem. He could be a lot better champion. In fact, not too long ago, I had a person wonder in my stream who was claiming that Hitmonkey is so much better than Mole Man, which he absolutely isn't. But the fact that he's so squishy and his health pool is so pathetic is probably the number one reason why he's nowhere near as good as Mole Man, which you can see later on this list. There are a lot of cool things about him. Without a doubt, he can prevent evade, he can go unblockable, he can crit on demand, he has access to bleed, he can shrug up debuffs. Perfect. What is the problem then? The problem then is that skill class is littered with champions who do all or most of those things just better and don't immediately die and fall over when you're taking a harder hit in the block. Ultimately, I do think that he is a good champion. He's definitely worth the investment if you personally do enjoy the guy. And he's a solid champion. I'm placing him in spot number 9 for now. We can see him do some fights here and there. But again, I think the biggest issue is the block proficiency and the squishiness of this guy. Why we are not seeing more of him all across the board. And perhaps also the fact that there are champions like Mallman who just do every single fight he would be able to do just better. Right. Now that we have discussed Hitmonkey shortly, let's move on to spot number 8. And spot number 8 is a bit painful one for a lot of people because a few months ago, he was the third best de facto skill champion. And that is Stealth Suit Spider-Man. Now, Stealth Suit Spider-Man still is arguably the better spider person, I suppose, in the game. And the main reason why he still maintains his relevance is obviously the access to slow and also ability to bypass miss. Now that is very, very important. His slow debuff is quite unique in a sense that you can use it to get around miss mechanic as well. Let's face it, if you are using either of the other two pre-fights, the underweight one is fairly useless. Therefore, again, skill class's biggest problem pretty much is power control and or lack thereof, and that underweight doesn't do anybody any favors. That really should be looked at, and the duration of underweight should be extended significantly, in my opinion. And the other one just gives him slightly more damage. All of those things being said, again, Stealth Suit Spidey suffers from a similar problem, just not as bad as Hitmonkey, where he is quite fragile, he's quite squishy. It's not definitely my cup of tea type of champion, but he has very solid damage output, and he's a champion that doesn't claim to be answer for every single problem. He's a champion that does the few things that he does very, very well, and that is do a ton of crits, deal plenty of damage, bypasses, evade, and unstoppable, and miss effects very well. Recently, a bunch of people had a chance to acquire this guy as 6-star. I hope you jumped on it because he is a very worthwhile addition to everybody's roster. And yeah, it's matter of preference, I think, to a point. And I have never been hiding the fact that in this game in particular, no matter how much I like Spider Verse and Spider Comics and stuff like that, I'm not a big fan of this super squishy, flimsy archetype of champions. However, I do respect him. I do respect his value. It's definitely not top 3 skill anymore, but he found his way in our 8th spot. And let's move on to spot number 7. Spot number 7 is a champion that I kind of want to see more, and I actually could potentially very easily see him placed significantly higher, and that is Crossbones. Fact of the matter is that the rework for Crossbones has done a lot for him. He is arguably one of the highest damage potential output champions in the game right now, which is like a huge prop to the guy. On top of that, he has plenty of utility. The only kind of thing that kind of infuriates me at this point is that his shrug off ability is 90% instead of 100% optimally, and he has no way in dealing those debuffs afterwards. However, it can be complemented with his ability to just shut down defensive ability accuracy in general. I do think Crossbones is tricky to play. I wish his Fury duration would be longer in its base, instead of having to rely on Mangog, who is a dud, to increase the duration of the Furies. But in general, I do think that Crossbones is a great champion. It was a very successful rework. I like the fact that he exists. There are definitely several nodes where you can cheese stuff with him and his ability to gain Furies by purifying debuffs. I do think that he's capable of great damage output, and I very well easily see myself taking him up in near future after I have done ranking up my Falcon, because I do kind of lucked out and I managed to dupe my Crossbone. Now he's only SIG 20, and ideally you do want him at a high SIG, because we can see instead of 90% debuff shrug off chance, you only got 48. But his damage capabilities, with the fact that he doesn't crit with everything else that he does, I do like the champion, and I do have a feeling that he might find himself higher on the list at some point later in the course of the game. However, he still, in my opinion, suffers from the issue of not having really proven himself. There have since his buff, we have seen him used here and there, but he hasn't made yet a huge mark on metagame in general. Therefore, he stays at spot number 7 for now, with possible promotion in future. Spot number 6, and spot number 6 is gonna piss off a lot of people, and a lot of people are gonna yell at me, and I already expect comments filled with spot number 6 complaints much more than my omission of Elsa in top 10. Spot number 6 right now, currently, goes to Shang-Chi. Now, I know everybody wants to tout him as the potential best skill character and stuff like that, but there is one huge thing that I have noticed in this game is that people do overhype things. People like things on paper, and people like big yellow numbers, and then the champions drift in obscurity. We have seen similar things with Obsidian, where people tout it as, I don't know, beyond set tier with insane damage output, and then Obsidian accomplishes absolutely nothing in no competitive game modes. We have seen that with Strife, the next Aegon, the next this, the next that, and then he hardly sees any use in any significant game modes. And that happens time and time again. Therefore, I have made a decision when it comes to me evaluating champions. I will never ever will I ever place them in like the top spots over champions that currently already have proven themselves in a ton of content. Now, do expect Shang-Chi to go up to 3, 4, 2, whatever, possibly as the best skill champion at some point in future. But if he wants to get there, he will have to put in the work. He will have to represent himself in Alliance Quest. He will have to represent himself in Alliance War. He will have to be one of the MVPs for 7.3, 7.4, whatever, next Abyss, or whatever. He has to put in work. Now, there's a ton of potential. I love almost everything about this champion. It's great. But great in terms of, I don't know, being fun or putting up big numbers is very far from being great in terms of having a relevant impact on the metagame. Now, I do think he is going to go higher in my next champion ranking. For sure. 100%. Right now, I'm not just going to give it to him. He has to work for it. He has to work for respect. He has to work for his title of beyond set tier. Nobody will ever automatically just get it for being in the game. That being said, let's move on to spot number 5. And spot number 5 is King Chin. And this is a champion that initially I wasn't the biggest fan of, but the more I play around with him, the more he grew on me. And I ended up taking him to rank 3. There's just no other way around it. Great champion. He's not the hardest damage dealing champion, even though his damage is definitely also plenty capable. But his piece of utility is tankiness, and everything about him just seems to work and does put in work. We see him killing Alliance War bosses, and plenty of them. We can see him tanking level 3s by being kind of in a similar fashion to Ghost, where he does take damage, but his tankiness and his increased physical resistance while he's charging heavy attack let him kind of like by himself act as a Ghost with Hood synergy and then heal up the damage via willpower mastery. He's immune to regeneration modification, which makes him great for Spectre lanes and for stuff like Cascading Failure and what have you. He can shrug off debuffs, and here is the one thing, the critical thing that I overlooked initially about him, because he on his base has about 60% chance to shrug off debuff if you do not synergize him. However, even if you do not shrug off that debuff immediately, once you reach 8 debuffs, including your rage stacks, you shrug off all the debuffs anyways. So even without Hood synergy, his debuff shrug off abilities are insane, and is one of the bigger upsides that he has over somebody like Crossbones, for example, where if a debuff slips your shrug off ability, it's there to stay for its full duration. However, Kingpin will still get rid of it even if he didn't shrug it off initially. That's another thing that I absolutely love about the guy. His level 1 has plenty of uses by being able to reduce opponents' attack and their ability accuracy, which I do like, decent amount of damage. And yeah, more and more this champion is growing on me. I think my initial harsh reaction on Kingpin was mainly because he was compared and praised over Mole Man, which I still disagree with. But that is what happens when you kind of like put in an antagonistic spin on a champion's abilities, because you see how great is a champion that is Kingpin might be trying to overshadow. Either way, fact of the matter is, when Kingpin and Mole Man got buffed, everybody was the winner, because both of them are amazing champions. And on top of that, obviously, access to degeneration ability accuracy reduction up until 130%. This is great. However, obviously, you do have to be able to throw that level 1 frequently in order to do that. Then access to unblockable and unstoppable is becoming more and more important in this game. Also, access to plenty of fury buffs, healing throughout the fight, insane amount of sustainability, and yeah, Kingpin is definitely a champion that I absolutely enjoy right now. I'm happy to have him at rank 3, and I'm sure that I'm going to get my value out of him. Now, the only kind of like downside of Kingpin compared to some of the other top options is that he does rely on relatively high signature ability in order to be able to maintain the best peak damage. And he's a champion that eventually I definitely do want to sig up, but unfortunately, I do have some other skill champions that I need to focus my attention on first, but eventually he's going to get those 6 stones, because I do think he deserves it, and I think Kingpin is great for Alliance Quest, I think Kingpin's great for Alliance War, I think he can perform in Abyss as well by being able to spam heavy attacks and having his sustainability, and overall, yeah, I definitely look forward to see what this guy can do exactly. But for now, spot number 5. Spot number 4 is gonna go to Falcon. Likely my next skill rank up. Falcon just kind of slid out there after his buff, and has showed himself to be an excellent champion for many different situations. Little known fact, Falcon is also one of the best available Abyss Collector options. You can get him down possibly even better than you can with Corvus, thanks to his increase of damage if opponent has a chance to evade. Unfortunately, my Falcon's unduped, which I do not necessarily anymore think is a deal breaker, but I do value his awakened ability quite a lot, to a point where I'm pondering whether I should use my awakening gem on the guy. All in all, Falcon is a very, very simple champion. In general, it's just reliable 100% access to defensive ability accuracy reduction, guaranteed from the first hit in the fight, and that's so useful. That is so much better than having to get to level 1 and having to be able to throw them and stuff like that. The fact that you can reduce opponents' abilities for every single hit that you land in the fight, the fact that you can reduce opponent's ability accuracy from the very, very beginning of the fight is so important to why Falcon is success. Now, other than that, let's face it, there isn't too much to him. Like, his level 1 inflicts bleed is like neat, whatever. His level 2 is guaranteed crit if you're locked on or something. Cool. None of that stuff really is important. What makes Falcon as good as he is, that is the very simple 100% ability accuracy reduction. That's it. But the fact that you have access from the very, very start of the fight means everything to the value of the champion. It's kind of very similar to why Black Widow was so dominant early on in the game, because there was nothing and nobody else for a very long time that could do the same thing, maybe except Quake. The other thing that I do think is underlooked aspect of Falcon is his synergies. He synergizes with a ton of champions, and those are decent synergy bonuses, increasing attack and critical damage. But if the numbers seem maybe not too high initially, then you will realize that every single synergy Falcon has active, he additionally grants 3% attack rating, and in fact, you can get to a point where you have like 50+% increased attack rating, a bunch of crit, and he is arguably the best artificial, just basic attack and crit stat increase champion. For instance, if you were to use, I don't know, Corvus for Legends Run, he is part of the team you want to use in order to give Corvus the most amount of crit damage and attack rating. And that's also kind of very cool, kind of subtle nuance to the character. But yeah, he's in spot number 4. Spot number 3, my personal favorite skill champion, I suppose, right now is Mole Man. Man, I absolutely love this guy. And it's a very beautiful story of a champion that comes out useless, gets a moderate amount of value changes, and just goes absolutely insane and demolishes everything. Now, I just enjoy this champion, first of all, because he has access to a ton of damage from the very, very early stages in the fight. So that makes him a great questing champion. In fact, he's one of my most used questing champions. In majority of the cases, you just parry, drop a heavy attack, let them hit your block, and lay in the opponent, and by the time your 5-6 charges expire, they're dead. Then on top of that, he's shock immune, which is neat. If you need be, you can have a very, very reliable debuff shrug off ability as well. His access to true strike, true accuracy from the very first hit of the fight, which is greatly useful. Then he also has very potent bleed damage, and he accesses to a ton of bleeds, thus making him synergize very well with Despair. And overall, Moleman just kind of being one of the MVPs, and another champion that already has left its mark in Alliance Quest and Alliance War and questing, and plenty of tricky situations. One of 7.2 MVPs for me personally. It's also an amazing counter for Gwen Pyrian, just FYI if you didn't know, because all of his abilities pretty much come in play, starting from his shock immunity to his, guaranteed crits ability, shrug of debuffs, all of that cool stuff. Very, very, very useful, for sure. And his ability to have assisted intercepts as well, which is one of the cooler things about him, because he can benefit from all of those foresight nodes and ebb and flow intercept and Aegis intercept and all the other stuff. So yeah, Moleman, just I don't want to go over and over. The guy is just absolutely bonkers insane. Love him, great champion. And spot number 2 is gonna go to Aegon. And honestly, like, part of me kind of wishes I could just take Aegon out of the rankings, because I would feel so much happier putting Moleman as the second, I suppose. But Aegon does deserve everybody's respect, because Aegon might not be a champion you use day to day. In fact, I'll put my hands up and say that I haven't used my Aegon for quite a significant amount of time. Because when it comes to kind of like casual questing and day-to-day utility, that ramp up is a bit annoying. However, he's perfectly capable of doing pretty much everything, which is the main thing that matters. He is undisputed king of long-term content at this point. And it's not necessarily because of his damage, but because of all the utility that he accomplished. He has access to True Strike, he has access to Shrug Off, like Champion, he has access to defensive ability accuracy reduction, access to Unstoppable, and, well, basically, whatever skill class is meant to do, he does it all, and he does it well. And, yeah, Aegon once again is proving his worth in Grandmaster's Gauntlet. He has never lost admiration for his abilities in Labyrinth and Abyss. He's still, even though he might not be your go-to option or my most favorite option in like Act 7.1 and 7.2, he can still do a ton of things there. But the only reason we don't use him more there is because we have more fun options to do, but he's perfectly useful there as well. Same goes to Cap EQ quests. And then on top of that, obviously, he is one of Act 6 MVPs, without a doubt. Because Act 6 was a lot more demanding than Act 7 is, and that kind of showed a lot of champions' true colors. And when push comes to shove, Aegon is definitely up there with the best of them. And he's a man that you might not pull off your roster every day, but you just know the fact that you have access to Aegon makes your heart a lot easier and a lot less stressed whenever any big piece of content gets announced, because there's about 90% chance that whenever Kabam will introduce the next Abyss or whatever it is, that Aegon is still going to be front and center smashing that content out. Since the release of Aegon, yeah, pretty much any significant, meaningful piece of content, Aegon has been up front and center as one of the first champions that people look at. So Aegon is second, and the first one is going to be very short. It's Nick Fury. Honestly, Nick Fury is one of the very, very few champions where I have a 6-star rank 3, 5-star rank 5, and I wish I had another one. He's just insane. I could go for 10 minutes telling everybody how amazing Nick Fury is, but I think most of you guys know it. Few things that I definitely want to point out, that in my opinion, Nick Fury is kind of like a perfect champion, or he gets to about as close to a perfect champion as about Dr. Doom gets as well. in a sense that A, he's a great synergy champion. He has significant impact on your account just through his synergies. If he was about as good as Heimdall is, you'd still probably end up using him more than you do Heimdall, just because of the synergies, just because of ability to mitigate liquid courage double edge damage, just because of synergy with Quake, and just because his synergies to protect you from Cold Snap, Frostbite, Incinerate, and everything else. All of that stuff is extremely important and is something you definitely do want to have access to. Second thing is he has the best consistent bleed damage. There are champions that can put up higher numbers in terms of bleed, but there is no RNG or chance involved with Nick Fury. He can get a ton of bleeds, which is important, and he can get a huge damage depending how you play him. And yeah, that is it. Nick is, in my opinion, the best bleed champion in the game as well. But on top of it all, that Nick Fury's Fury also makes sure that even if opponent is bleed immune, he still hits like a truck. I, in fact, often use Nick Fury against bleed immune matchups. I use Nick Fury often even to deal with stuff like, I don't know, White Magneto in Alliance Quest minibots. Why? Because he goes unblockable, he makes the fight straightforward for the entire fight, and even though I can't bleed the opponent, and even though I have class disadvantage, that Fury is so busted that he still gets the job done. Other than that, obviously his utility to bypass, miss, and evade is incredibly great. He has probably the best unblockable ability in the game, where once you drop like 2 level 1s, you're just unblockable, and that's it. And there is another thing that most people don't really understand about Nick Fury and how insanely potent it is. If I am not mistaken, Nick Fury is the only champion in the game that can not only purify debuffs and get rid of them. Nick Fury is the only champion in the game that can also get rid of any and all passive effects on him. And that is so underrated. Yes, you can only do that once in a quest at the point of destroying life model decoy, but it has saved me so many times, and it is an ability that I do rely on. Obviously, alongside the fact that he has that extended health pool and all the other cool stuff. But in general, that is, I think, the final icing on a cake that is Nick Fury. It is so busted that he can purify stuff like neurotoxins, like passive heal block, like any other status effects that are meant to significantly affect how the fight works. He gets rid of that when his life model decoy is destroyed. And obviously it's not strategy that you're going to be able to use for every fight in a quest. When push comes to shove, it's an ability that always comes through as a clutch. Absolutely love it. He is the GOAT. And I'll be honest, I love Shang-Chi. I see Shang-Chi raising up the ranks, potentially outclassing Kingpin, potentially outclassing Falcon and Mallman and maybe even Aegon. Do not see Shang-Chi laying a finger on the throne of Nick Fury. Not now, not ever. But that's just me. Maybe you think different. Anyways, this video took a while, but we got there in the end. So now we only have Mutant class, and Mutant class is also going to be extremely tricky to make, so you don't expect a short video. That being said, hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know which champions you would have ranked differently, and I shall catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information